Welcome to the beginning bag making class featuring the Janie pouch ASG bonus pattern by Papaya Design. This is a class that was previously held on November 11th. First, today we will be talking about prepping your fabric and your interfacing in order to proceed with the sewing tutorial. Your pattern has on page 3 a fabric and interfacing cut list, and the directions are pretty straightforward. I did want to cover some things about interfacing that was important to know in case you've never worked with SF 101. You want to be sure that you are using a dry iron and following the manufacturer's instructions for applying the interfacing. You want to be sure to press and not iron, as moving the iron back and forth reactivates the adhesive and can cause wrinkling. We'll be stitching at 2.5 millimeters to 3 millimeters for joining pieces together, and for top stitching 3.5 millimeters to 4 millimeters, your preference. Take our slip pocket that's interfaced, and we're going to fold the right sides together with the short ends matching. And we're going to pin this in place or clip. And then we're going to mark the beginning and ending of about a 3-inch opening. We're going to start with a back stitch to hold that in place. Come down and pivot at the corner. We're doing a 1/4 inch seam. Stop there for the opening and back stitch. Move over and start at the beginning of the opening again, back stitching. When you get to the corner to pivot, make sure your needle is not only down in the fabric, but on its way back up to avoid getting a loop and a little angle stitch right there. Back stitch at the end. We're going to trim the corners at angles, being careful not to cut through your stitching or too close to it. We will not trim the edges next to the opening. Press the stitches in, which makes a stronger seam, and then turn the slip pocket inside out. You can use a point turner or a chopstick. Be really careful when you're poking those corners. Run your turner down the seam edge, and that keeps that from rolling in. Try to get a nice crisp corner. You're going to turn under that seam allowance on the open edge, and then you're going to press. I'm going to pin this to one of the lining pieces. Mark the center of your pocket. And then mark the centers on your lining piece on the long edges. All right, lining up the centers, making sure that the opening is at the bottom of your pocket. And you're going to drop down at least 1 3/4 inches. And you can go down as far as 2 1/4 inches, depending on what you would like to put in these pockets. Pin your pocket in place. Now we're going to top stitch at 1/8 inch, back stitching at the beginning. Don't stitch over your pins. And again, pivoting at the corner, needle down but on its way back up to avoid a loop or an angled stitch. Now we're stitching across the opening, closing it. And backstitch at the end. You can divide your pocket in any configuration that you would like if you're wanting to put tools or some makeup or however this bag is going to be used. This is an example of a wrist strap folded and ready to be stitched. And I'm showing you here the advantage of using wonder clips as opposed to pins. This is 4 layers of fabric with interfacing, and so it's bulky and hard to get the straight pins through, which distorts the fabric. And as you can see, the wonder clips have a nice flat edge, which makes it easier for you to top stitch neatly. All right, here's your wrist strap. We're going to turn it over and we're going to mark the centers on the short side. And then draw a line down the middle. Now we're going to press the long edges together, which just gives us a crease in the middle. On longer pieces, the crease helps with folding to the middle when you're using cotton fabric. Now you're going to press the long edges just scant of that middle line, because when they fold in together, there'll be an edge of your wrist strap and you don't want it big and bulky. This is the exact same technique you would be using if you were making a strap for a bag, like a shoulder strap. If we do this out of vinyl, you do not want to fold and make a crease in the middle because it would be hard to get it out, as you can't steam press vinyl. I'm putting on silicone fingers, which when working with something narrow like this can be very helpful that the steam doesn't burn your fingers. I'm not pressing steam here because of the interfacing, but you can see it coming out of the iron. So we've pressed that, and now we're going to clip it together before we sew the top stitching. Now we're going to stitch at 1/8 of an inch top stitching, so you may want to increase your stitch length to 3.5 to 4. In order to keep your strap from twisting, particularly when you have a long strap, you want to stitch in the exact same direction. So now I'm top stitching 1/8 of an inch on the outside edge, going in the same direction that I stitched before. There's your strap. If you're using a heavier fabric like a canvas or decor fabric, you may not need to interface a strap at all. We'll just fold it in half and clip it and set that to the side. This picture shows zippers size 3, which is the zipper that I recommended you use for this pattern, which is just a regular zipper you can pick up at the store. You would use for pants or a skirt. The larger zipper is a size 5. It's very common in bag patterns to see in the directions to use a number 3 or number 5 zipper. And it's important to know which zipper you're going to be using because that will change the seam allowance. Most designers within the patterns will explain which seam allowance, but just in case they don't, or you need to substitute and it's not mentioned in the pattern, a number 3 zipper is referring to the zipper coil, and it measures 3 millimeters across. Therefore, a number 5 zipper, referring to the zipper coil, measures 5 millimeters across. Also, a number 3 zipper is 1 inch wide across the tape, and a number 5 zipper is 1 1/4 inches wide across the tape. These zippers may cause some rippling because the coil's not as big to help hold it flat, and the zipper tape not as wide. So to counteract that, we will steam press this zipper. That helps it shrink a little bit. It is polyester, so it's going to stretch back out. And using a 2.5 millimeter or 3 millimeter stitch will also help with the rippling. Right, we're going to take the 2 zipper tabs that are 2 inches by 1.5 inches. We're going to draw center lines long edge to long edge, so across the short section. So here in the middle of the 2 inches, we'll mark 1 inch. And then mark that line in the middle. We're going to be preparing the zippers as far as pressing them in the identical way that we prepared the wrist straps. Now the zipper, we're going to be removing the metal stops. So I'm marking here. And the zipper should be 8 5/8 inches. But there is a fold in the middle of the zipper from it coming out of the pack. And like I discussed earlier, we're going to press the zipper to help it shrink a little bit before we work with it. And really, the zipper does not need to be unzipped any while you're pressing it, but it is going to be very important that it be unzipped before you cut it. Now we're making the zipper tabs the same way. Because this is small, I didn't fold it in half. It's easy to work and hold it with your fingers. The zipper tabs are going to serve as your stops. So we're removing the metal stops so we don't have to worry about sewing through them. And we're going to push the zipper snugly into the tab. Verify that your zipper is unzipped before you trim the other end. It's a nylon zipper. You should be able to cut through with your regular scissors. Now unzip that a little bit more so I could pinch the ends closer to put on the tab. Okay, we're going to top stitch this at about 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to make sure you've folded this nicely so that your top stitching is also catching that underneath. No need to back stitch at the beginning because we're going to trim these tabs off. Alright, so after we've stitched both ends, we trim the tabs even and trim away from your zipper so you don't accidentally cut into the tape. Your zipper should finish at 8 3/4 inches. Here's an example of 2 decorative ways you could finish the edges of your pleats if you liked. On the left-hand side, those pleats are stitched on the edge only. So you would have to fold back and have the edge next to your presser foot so you could edge stitch there. The pleats on the right-hand side have been sewn down on the edges. So these pleats are now flat and will not bow out. Before we get ready to do the pleats, you should have a hem guide or a very thin piece of cardboard or cardstock with 3/4 inch marked to use to help you with your pleats. You can pin the edges of the pleats and fold that way visually, but having a guide that you push into the edge to make a crisp edge is very helpful. Okay, your short end should measure 12 inches. The length, what you cut at 16 1/2. I've drawn a line down the middle on the long edges. So it should be 6 inches from each edge. This will be a cut line later, but it also helps in lining up your pleats to visually see that they are perpendicular to this line. I'm going to mark the center. And then I've lined up the middle line right on that line to help keep this straight. I've marked the center, and I like to put a C there just to visually tell me quickly that that is the center line, not a pleat to fold on. And don't do like I did and use a heat removing pin. When you have your pleat sheet with the pleat measurements marked, you could just line that up against the line and mark, but I'm going to use my quilting ruler. We mark 1 inch on either side of the center line. Then we mark 3/4 inch past those lines, and that's your first pleat. Then we mark 1 3/8 inches, which is the space between pleat 1 and 2. And the pleat will actually lay over that. And then we mark the last pleat 3/4 inch from that line. And I've lined up the pattern piece there with the markings. You can see that they match. All right, continuing to place a line from the quilting ruler on the middle line and matching up the small dots I've made. I'll mark all these lines. And I'm drawing arrows here to remind me which way the pleats fold, and they fold to the middle. On the reverse side, they will be folding away from it. All right, so I'm folding toward the middle, and I have placed the hem gauge on the first line that was 1 inch from the center. This piece of cardboard I got out of a calendar. It's just a tiny bit thicker than the hem gauge. I marked 3/4 inch on it place it on that 1-inch line from the center and have the pleat folded back. Okay, then we're going to make the second pleat. So I'll fold the top part on the very last line that we drew. So it's the line furthest from the center. Insert my cardboard hem gauge on the second to last line. And press the pleat in place. This is what it looks like on the outside. So we have a big center pleat when it's all complete, and then one small pleat past that. Remember, don't move your iron a lot. You want to just basically be pressing. This is all pleats done and pressed in. This is what it looks like on the outside. You want to visually look at it, make sure things look nice and even. I'm going to clip the ends. We're going to baste through the middle first, 1/8 inch seam on either side of that long middle mark. This is going to be where we cut the two pieces in half. These are our bottoms. So a long basting stitch here will be fine. Now we're going to baste the upper edges. Now I like to mark a B on either side of that center line to denote that that is the bottom of the bag. Those pleats match, so we want to be sure that that's what we're seaming together later on. I'm cutting these into two pieces. In the pattern, the directions are a little backwards from this. I actually trim it to 10 inches on the sides and then cut it in half. Either way is fine. It's a little more efficient to trim the big piece first. Mark the center line, and we want 5 inches on each side of the center line. If you've done your pleats correctly and centered your line correctly, you should have about 1/4 inch on each side to trim off. So your pleated side will measure 10 inches across by 6 inches tall, and we'll trim the second side if you didn't do this as one piece. And take your exterior accent pieces. You're going to match one to each pleated side. Verify that B will be at the bottom. Do not attach the accent piece to the bottom. Match up your centers. Your accent might just be a scant short on the sides after you get this pinned, and that's because it's going over the bulk of the pleats. As long as that discrepancy is going to fit within your 3/8 inch seam allowance, you do not need to trim to match. Verify the bottom is on the other end. We're going to stitch this at 3/8 inch. I backstitch out of habit. These are going to be closed in seams. The clips are better here than using pins because you have the thickness of the pleats. Chain stitching here. Clip those apart. We're going to press the seam up towards the accent piece. We're going to top stitch at 1/8 inch. You might want to lengthen your stitch here to 3.5 or 4. This is a good place to use contrast stitching. I'm using contrast just so you can see it on this video. I don't like to show off my stitching that much in case I make a mistake. It's a good place for decorative stitching too if you've got some pretty stitches on your sewing machine. This is a picture of a zipper pinned in place to be assembled, and I'm just showing you an example again of the Wonder clips keeping it nice and flat, and the pins can gather it up a little bit, make lumps in it, which doesn't give you as nice an edge when you're sewing and can cause your zipper edges not to line up. You may need to change to your zipper foot at this point if you don't have a narrow presser foot on your machine. I'm going to measure in 5/8 inch from each edge on the accent piece. Your zipper assembly with the tabs should fit between, and you need to have the middle of your zipper marked. Line up the middle mark of the zipper with the middle mark of the accent piece. Your zipper is face down, so tab laying down with the tab to the left hand side. Clipping the zipper tape right along the edge. We're going to baste this at 1/8 inch seam allowance. Start with your needle down in the tab so that your presser foot doesn't get caught trying to come up the hump. We are going to place a lining piece on top. Match the centers and match the edges. Really may be best to save your pocket piece for the other side so that when you unzip your bag from the left-hand side, the pocket is facing you. The way I assembled this, the pocket is facing the front of the bag. That is noted as a reminder in the pattern. You're stitching here at 1/4 inch, regular stitch length 2.5 or 3. When you have your zipper unzipped a couple of inches, and when you reach the tab, put your hand underneath and pull the zipper out of the way, and that keeps your stitch from jogging around that zipper tab, giving you a nice straight edge for when you turn this back. And because you basted this before, you're not trying to keep 3 different things lined up because your zipper would want to move. So the basting's held it in place for you. Right, you want to verify that this is what your zipper looks like right now. You want that tab facing up with the accent piece. We're going to assemble the other side. Now your zipper is face down with the tab to the right. Line up your centers. Make sure your edges all match. I've already unzipped the zipper a little bit. You don't need it unzipped for basting, but once you lay the lining piece on there, you may forget to unzip it. And you do have to fuss with it a little bit to get around that tab. That gap will want to open up some, so make sure you've clipped it there. And we're going to baste at 1/8 of an inch again. Drop down the needle in the tab. And I like to verify before I put on the last piece that the zipper is correct. Now we're going to add that last lining piece, which should be your pocket piece. Match up the centers. Nice straight edge. And a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. When we get to that zipper tab, make sure that your needle is down. Lift the presser foot, reach underneath, and pull the zipper tab out of the way. And just press the accent edges next to your zipper. Really don't need to press the lining at this point because we're going to move it out of the way while we top stitch. We will make sure that that seam allowance is folded toward the accent piece before you top stitch. And top stitch at 1/8 of an inch. Again, contrasting or decorative stitching would be nice right here. Make sure it caught the seam allowance under there. And do the same for the other side. This is how your assembly should look now. Now we're going to add the wrist strap, folding the lining out of the way. We're going to place it about 1/2 inch below the top stitching on the end with the zipper tab. Clip that in place. This is really thick, so you're going to want to start needle down on the wrist strap. And base that at 1/4 inch. Now here's your body assembly. We want to fold the linings together and the exterior sides together. You want to make sure that your zippers unzip. I added a safety pin, but you could actually open the zipper all the way because the tab will stop it. Make sure your wrist strap is folded in and flat. We're going to mark the seam allowance. On the exterior side, we'll be marking a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. We're marking these seam allowances because for the lining, we're going to be marking a larger seam allowance to have it fit snugly down into your bag. And this makes it easier just to stitch along the line than to remember to change your seam allowance as you're stitching. Also, by marking this across the accent pieces, you're verifying that your zipper tabs are out of the seam allowance. And if for some reason they're not, you can adjust your seam allowance to be sure not to include those. They should be about 1/4 of an inch away from the seam allowance. We're marking a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the lining. And then we're going to mark in 2.5 inches from the edge, so 2 inches from that seam, to leave a 5-inch opening to turn the bag. Mark 3/8 inches about an inch, 1.5 inches below the accent, because this is where you'll gradually change your stitch width. Now we're going to mark a 1-inch square at each corner from the seam lines, and this will be for cutting or boxing the corners. Alright, the exterior is all marked. We're going to clip together. Again, clips would be better than pins here because of so much thickness. You want to line up those accent edges so at the top of your bag is a focal point. This end has the wrist strap, so you'll have to play with it a little bit to make that match to get over that hump there. And then you want to clip at the pleats. We're going to leave that open, 5 inches open. We're ready to baste. We've got our 1-inch corners drawn for later. So we're going to baste there first. This way we can check that everything matches at those 3 areas before we stitch all the way around. Put this on a longer basting stitch. And we're going to baste at 1/4 of an inch. Start with your needle down right at the thick area so that you're not having to go up a hump and it pushes it out of the way. Now we're going to baste the pleats 1/4 inch. Holding the pleats down. If you find that your presser foot has pushed the pleats on the other side, it may be helpful to start from the center on each and stitch along the pleats in the direction they go. Now we're basting the side with the wrist strap, starting in the thick area. Just take your time. Now you have to push down in front of the presser foot. And then check that everything lined up to your satisfaction. If it didn't, you can remove the basting and do it again. Now we're not going to sew around those 1-inch areas right now. Those are for cutting out. Backstitch, starting at the opening for your lining. Just follow the lines. And then we're going to finish up at the other edge of the opening and backstitch. We're going to cut out those 1-inch corners, being careful not to cut past the corner. And now we're going to trim our seam to 1/4 of an inch. We won't trim the edge with the opening. Makes it harder to work with it for folding it under if you don't have much of a seam allowance left. Now we're going to box the corners. You're going to open up where you trimmed out the 1 inch. Match up your seams. Nest them together because they're small, so it's a little hard to open them up. Make sure it's nice and straight across. Clip them together. We're going to stitch at 3/8, back stitching at the beginning and the end. On the bottom seam, because you have that larger seam allowance, you could open that seam up flat if you want, but nesting is fine. We're going to trim the seams to 1/4 inch for less bulk in the bottom of your bag. Now we're going to turn our bag inside out. You want to reach up into the zipper section. Make sure your zipper's all the way open. Grab the handle and gently pull out your bag. This is also referred to as birthing the bag or bagging the bag. Remove the safety pin if you used one. Take a chopstick or a point turner. Work out the corners at your tabs. Chopstick is really good right here. It's longer. It's easier to work it in because of it being narrow. You will have a little gap there. One reason we do not top stitch the lining when we get the zipper installed is so it doesn't make a big bulky mess there at the zippers. Push out the corners of your exterior. Roll with your fingers if needed. Check out how your pleats look. So if for some reason they're not up to your preferred look, you could push this back through and redo that area. Accent sides look good. All that is to your liking. Then fold under the seam allowance and clip or pin your opening on your lining. And then you'll use a 1/8 inch seam allowance and sew this opening closed. You could hand stitch this if you prefer to do it that way. It's going to be inside your bag, no one's going to see it, and this might be a little stronger too, depending on what you want to put in this bag. You're going to push your lining down inside your bag, working the corners into the exterior corners. Use the chopstick if needed to work those corners nicely. Now we're going to give your bag a really good press. You can use a tailor's roll, a tailor's ham, a rolled up towel. We want to give these seams a really good press. So here's using a towel, which will work just as well. The accent gets a little wrinkly from turning and maneuvering the bag. Your pleats could use another good press down. The bottom seam needs a good press. Do a before and after photo of your bag. You can see the importance of pressing. Now, if you wanted to add any embellishment on your accent before you press might be good, because handling that bag is going to wrinkle it up some. I got this all nicely pressed out and then sewed on some snowflake buttons and wrinkled up my accent again. This last photo is a picture of a finished bag, and I'm using it to hold my sewing supplies. Thank you for watching, and check the link below for where to access the free pattern for your download, and be sure to share this video and the pattern with your American Sewing Guild friends.